and welcome to our final episode of Off the Page Book Club for Tweens. For this month, we have been going through our latest book, Pie by Sarah Weeks. Today, we are going to go over chapters 10 through 14. Those are our final chapters in this book. But before we do, let's go ahead and answer those trivia questions that we posed last week. And we'll also pose our newest ones today for chapters 10 through 14. So let's begin with those questions from last week. Whose shopping list had Band-Aids, shortening, sand, and sardines? The answer was Miss Girk, the principal. Next question. What was Miss Girk hiding under her clothes? Her muscles. She is a bodybuilder. What did Miss Girk drop in Polly's casket? Her mother's ring. How does Charlie remember his grandmother? What does he do to remember his grandmother? He keeps a bottle of her perfume by his bedside and sniffs it when he wants to remember her. And finally, where was the cat Lardo found? He was found wandering outside the Ipsy Inn. Very good. Let's go ahead and pose our newest questions for this week. Question number 1. What did Sylvia DeSoto throw out of the Ipsy Inn window? Who drives a green Chevrolet? What initials were on the luggage found in Sylvia DeSoto's car? When Sylvia left the Ipsy Inn, where was she headed? And finally, what is Sylvia DeSoto's real name? Those are our questions for chapters 10 through 14. Let's go ahead and go through those chapter summaries. Let's begin with chapter 10. The Ipsy Inn was on the top of the hill overlooking the town of Ipswich. Alice had rode her bike up the hill and was lying in a field next to the Ipsy Inn. Alice noticed Sylvia DeSoto leaning out of a window, looking both ways before she dropped her mother's chocolate cream pie out the window and into the bushes below. Just as Charlie showed up, Sylvia DeSoto was walking out of the inn carrying a brown leather case. She then got into a green Chevrolet that was parked in the corner under the shade of a shagbark hickory tree. Charlie and Alice decided to follow the car to the Needleman's driveway. Melanie Needleman had heard through the grapevine that a reporter from Look magazine had come to town sniffing around for information about Polly Portman's pie crust recipe. Once Sylvia DeSoto was inside of the Needleman's house, Alice had Charlie be the lookout while she searched the green Chevrolet. Alice found a white handkerchief with a gold hoop earring inside of it, exactly like the one she'd found under the radiator. Alice also noticed that Sylvia DeSoto's suitcase has the initials JQ engraved on it. Alice thought that Sylvia was too interested in her mother's pie and had stolen it to see if Mrs. Anderson knew the pie recipe by heart. Alice also thought that Miss DeSoto gave Lardo the sleeping powder. Alice came up with a plan to catch Miss DeSoto red-handed with Charlie's help. Charlie knocked on the Needleman's door and asked for Nora when the mayor answered. Charlie told the mayor she wanted to talk about Polly Portman's pie crust recipe. Charlie shouted that part really loud. Charlie asked Nora to the movies on Saturday night. As Charlie was shouting, he told Nora he was going to ask Alice Anderson to go to the movies with him, but now that she's found her Aunt Polly's secret pie crust recipe, she doesn't have time for things like going to the movies anymore. Doesn't have quite the best way with words. Charlie told Nora that he kept shouting so that she was sure to hear him when he said that Alice sure has changed since she found that recipe. All that she talks about is how rich she's going to be when she sells it. She even sleeps with it under her pillow every night. Can you believe it? Right under her pillow. So Charlie's trying to help. All that was left to do was wait for the rat to take the bait. So Charlie set up a plot to catch them red-handed. That's the end of chapter 10. Let's go and continue to chapter 11. Alice was worried Sylvia DeSoto, or whoever she was, wouldn't take the bait. When they got back to Charlie's house for lunch, Charlie's mother told him that he had a whole slew of messages waiting for him. Alice and Charlie headed to the A&P and split up the list between them. That way would be the fastest. Their first stop was Gillespie's garage, where they dropped off a bag of yams. Alice told Mr. Gillespie that Aunt Polly always used maple syrup in her sweet potato pie. The next stop was to Reverend Flowers to drop off 3 bags of sugar. When they got there, Reverend Flowers' fingertips were red from getting the pits out of cherries. Alice told him that Aunt Polly had taught her a little trick about pitting cherries. Use a paper clip. You just unfold it, stick it in, and pull the pit right out. Alice also informed him that Aunt Polly won the Blueberry Award last year for her cherry pie. They had never given the prize to the same kind of pie 2 years in a row. Reverend Flowers told Alice that he got to thinking about Polly, and for the same reason, it made him want to make a cherry pie. Next, they went to Mr. Evans' house to drop off bananas. Mr. Evans was going to surprise his wife, who was turning 60 tomorrow, with a banana cream pie. Polly always made her one on her birthday, but he wished that he knew how Polly made her meringue. Alice told Mr. Evans to add a little cream of tartar to the egg whites, and to raise the oven rack a notch to brown it. Charlie told Alice that for someone who didn't know how to bake a pie, she sure did know a lot about it. Alice just guessed she had soaked things up without realizing it. When Alice got home, there was an awful smell in the house, and a hideous new pie sitting on the kitchen counter. Alice went to bed and laid awake for hours, nervously waiting. She heard a rustling of leaves, followed by the sound of her window being opened. A minute later, the shiny black toe of a man's wingtip shoe appeared in the windowsill. To her relief, it was just Charlie who thought that Alice would need some backup. He had been sitting outside for the past 3 hours. Charlie went to hide in the closet. Alice turned out the light and laid back down in her bed to wait. A few moments later, a shadowy figure slipped through the window, crossed quickly to the bed, and hesitated slightly before slowly sliding a hand under Alice's pillow. That's when Lardo made his surprise attack. Charging up from under the bed, fangs bared and back arched, he leapt at the intruder with a terrifying hiss. Alice turned on the light, and Charlie jumped out of the closet just as a woman, dark-haired and dressed head to toe in black, was out the window again. But Charlie grabbed her by the legs and hung on for dear life. Alice told her parents that this was the person who stole the pie, who broke into the pie shop and catnapped Lardo and stole Aunt Polly's key. When Mrs. Anderson saw who the woman was, she let out a gasp. It was Jane Quisenberry, the Blueberry bridesmaid. The police were called, and Miss Quisenberry was taken down to the station for questioning. Back at the Ipsy Inn, the police recovered Mrs. Anderson's chocolate cream pie. The police also found a number of interesting things in Miss Quisenberry's suitcase, including the key to Polly Portman's pie shop, 2 wigs, 1 white, 1 blonde, and a bottle of sleeping powder. Miss Quisenberry had sprinkled the powder on some cat food in order to make it possible for her to examine Lardo without being scratched. She was convinced for some reason that Polly had tattooed the pie crust recipe to his belly. That's the end of chapter 11. On to chapter 12. A few days later, Charlie showed up with a bag full of peaches. Charlie told Alice she should make a pie with them. Together they made the pie crust, and Alice used Aunt Polly's peach pie recipe that the police found. They found all of those recipes in Jane Quisenberry's suitcase. Alice had just set the timer on the oven when the doorbell rang. Ding dong! It was Gerald P. Hammerschlacht, president of Hammerschlacht Products and Services out of Cincinnati, Ohio. Mrs. Anderson told him she wasn't interested in buying anything. He told Mrs. Anderson that he was sorry that he'd missed the funeral. He had been away in Europe on business. Now he had come to pay his condolences and to give thanks the entire Anderson family on behalf of Lardo, the cat, for Polly Portman's generous gift. Mrs. Anderson was confused. How Mr. Hammersclacht know Lardo? Know it? Why, I invented it, he said proudly. Lardo. Vegetable shortening is the cornerstone of Hammersclacht products and services, and I expect our sales will be even higher now, thanks to your sister's generous gift. Mr. Anderson had asked, "What gift?" "The pie crust recipe." Mr. Hammersclacht told him. He had met with Polly some years back, not long after she won her first Blueberry Awards. He was there to honor his part of the agreement that they made. So the lard was that secret ingredient. Chapter 13. The reason that Hammersclacht's name had sounded familiar to Alice was because he was one of the two people Mr. Ogden had mentioned having witnessed her Aunt Polly's will. Alice thought that Aunt Polly let the pie crust to Lardo. Mrs. Anderson told her that she did, but just not the way we thought she did. When Mr. Ogden read the will aloud, he said that Polly had left her recipe to her beloved Lardo, and her beloved cat, Lardo, to Alice. But in fact, what Aunt Polly had written was that she left her recipe to her beloved, capital Lardo, and her beloved cat Lardo to Alice. Polly Portman had a gift for pie making, and since her greatest pleasure was sharing a gift with others, she had decided that the best thing to do would be to leave her pie crust recipe to the company that made Lardo vegetable shortening. Polly's pie crust recipe would be on every can of Lardo. Mr. Hammersclacht had agreed that after Polly passed, he would come to Ipswich with two things in hand: a contract for Alice to write an advertising jingle for Lardo, and a contract for Alice's mother to sing it. After dinner, they had the peach pie that Alice and Charlie made. Alice took a bite of the pie. The crust was a bit rubbery, and the filling wasn't nearly as good as Aunt Polly's had been, but to her surprise, it was actually not half bad. In the fall of 1955, a housewife from Haddonfield, New Jersey, won the Blueberry Award for her groundbreaking Mississippi mud pie, thus ending Polly Portman's 13-year streak. Now on to the final one. This is the epilogue, happening 40 years later. Charlie and Alice had been best friends for 40 years, but in the end, it was Nora Needleman who had captured Charlie's heart. Nora and Charlie had 5 children, and Polly, the third, was her favorite. After some convincing from Charlie, Alice and Nora had become as close as sisters. At 10 years old, Polly was a baker, just as Aunt Polly had been. Charlie and Nora bought the old pie shop and fixed it up. They kept the name Pie, and on September 6, 1993, Nora won the Blueberry Medal for her peanut butter raspberry pie. At the APA conference, Nora gave all the credit to her husband, Charlie, because he had been helping her in the kitchen when she made it, and had accidentally mixed up 2 recipes. That's the end. At the end of this video, I will be putting up our final recipes for those pies that we've been getting to see through all of our chapters. And before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and answer our trivia questions of what we just read in our summaries. So our first question was, what did Sylvia de Soto throw out of the Ipsy Inn window? It was the missing chocolate cream pie that Alice's mother had baked. The next question, who drives a green Chevrolet? That was Sylvia de Soto. What initials were on the luggage found in Sylvia de Soto's car? The letters J.Q. When Sylvia left the Ipsy Inn, where was she headed? To the Needleman's home. What was, or what is, Sylvia de Soto's real name? What does the JQ stand for? And that was for Jane Quisenberry. Thank you so much for tuning in for our last chapters for our book, Pie by Sarah Weeks. Now, if you enjoyed getting to hear some of these summaries and you haven't had a chance to read the book yet, go ahead, hop online. You can request this book and reserve it for yourself, or you can stop on in, see if we have it on the shelves, and you can grab everything else that you would like to check out. We look forward to our next month's book. I will be announcing that on social media very shortly. And until then, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Off the Page Book Club for Tweens. Bye! And as promised, here are those recipes. This one is Concord Grape Pie. Now say hello to Pecan Pie. Now we'll take a look at Peach Pie. Here is some Rhubarb Pie. Now let's wrap it up with that mix-up, Peanut Butter Raspberry Cream Pie.